Well, good morning or afternoon, whenever you're watching. I'm joined today during Mental Health Month on Mental Health Monday by Dr. Brittany Rogers. And Dr. Rogers is a board certified psychiatrist in general psychiatry and adolescent and child psychiatry. And she's in private practice here in Greenville. And she's a good friend to the church. And we lean on her expertise on several occasions throughout the year. So today we're going to talk about grief, all right? So let's begin with this question. Why do we grieve?
So I think we grieve because we love.
Okay.
If something isn't, if we didn't care about something, if we didn't love, then the loss of something wouldn't create this vacancy and lead to grief.
So when a child loses a pet who they were attached to, that's real grief.
It is.
Okay. All right. So talk about the broadness of grief, because sometimes we think about grief just in the loss of a loved one, but it's much broader than that. So explain to the viewers.
Absolutely. So I do think that grief is a vastly large range of loss. It can be, truly the loss of a loved one, including pets. Mm-hmm. It can be the loss of something we expected. It can be, pregnancy loss, the loss of our anticipated growing up in the same hometown because there's a sudden move and we're uprooted. We're losing these friendships, even if we, can continue those virtually now. Mm-hmm. It can be the loss of a childhood as we reminisce and think about what we wish had been different for ourselves or for others growing up. There can be a lot that is involved in grief, including relationships.
Well, like if one of the ways I see it is there's an aging couple and the couple neither one of them are dying, but one of them is got Alzheimer's or going into a nursing home. I mean, the grief doesn't happen at the grave. The grief begins to happen then, is what I've witnessed.
Yeah. And sometimes with, again, like a progressive illness, like Alzheimer's or like a terminal diagnosis, sometimes we'll see like pre-grieving in that way because we see that grief begins before the loss of someone.
Yeah, I see that too. All right, so when we start to grieve, we feel some pain inside of us. And I'm sure that you've seen in your practice a lot of ways in which this behavior comes out of us, how we grieve and how we grieve in some unhealthy ways or reach for things that are unhealthy to help us grieve. So explain to the folks what they shouldn't be doing. What are the ways in which we reach out and do things during this time of sorrow which are not good practices?
Sure. Yeah, and I think that can vary, certainly, depending on what, how we are inclined in general, because we're all different. Sometimes folks struggle in that they aren't reaching out at all. They're just sort of shutting down. They are not talking about things at all. Not talking to others, not going out, not doing their normal activities, and really just withdrawing.
Okay.
So isolating is a big concern.
Yeah.
And then I think also leaning on things, whether that's alcohol, whether that's anything that's serving in an unhealthy way to, numb these sorrowful feelings that, we're having to sort of lead me to feel temporarily different or to numb what I'm feeling that's uncomfortable, that's not serving me well, could be tricky. Whether that's suddenly I'm on Amazon all the time and drivers are dropping things off at my house nonstop.
Right.
Or, alcohol is becoming a much more frequent problem.
Trying to deaden the pain. Okay. Does talking about the pain help? So
it can be one of those things where it's really painful at first, but we know that it's helpful.
Okay.
And we can be selective about who we're talking to. So it's not something where someone needs to talk to everybody they know about this pain, right? So we can be selective about who we're talking with, finding people who, who we feel close with, who feel supportive and safe to talk to. Perhaps people who have been through something similar, but not necessarily.
And here's where I'll insert something from the listener's side, that when people start pouring out their pain to us, and they've trusted you with that, they've come to you, and you're not a professional, you're their friend, you were their high school friend, you've walked with them for 40 years. The thing is, oftentimes we get distracted and we don't pay attention to them. They've needed us how many times in their lifetime? Maybe 3 times, maybe 5 times. They've actually needed us to step up to the plate. And the one time that they need us, we get preoccupied. So it's best if we just can put things aside and give people attention. So how about this? You've got somebody who, they're grieving. How do they know when they're crossing over from something that they can deal with by conversing with other people to a point where they need to see a professional? Are there some signs that people can look for to say, well, I think I need to sit down with somebody now? What's that?
Yeah, so I think those warning signs of, if I'm sort of shutting down my world, that would be a concern.
Okay.
Or if I'm deadening the pain, numbing that pain in unhealthy ways.
Okay.
I think also, often it can be a cliche, but I always think about grief as, this sort of metaphor of I'm in the ocean and then I'm having, things are okay, things are steady, and then all of a sudden I get knocked down by a wave I didn't see coming, and the intensity of grief catches me off guard. And if it feels like I'm in a turbulent ocean all the time, I think that would be my indication that those symptoms are persistent.
Okay.
This is not something where I'm feeling more like myself with occasional grief difficulty. I'm really sort of treading water a lot of the time. And that's, I think, when I would want somebody to make sure they're talking with somebody.
Okay. I mean, I can sense that too in people that, you go see and, they rock along. Most of the time when they go visit them, they're just steady, they're okay. But then you go once and they're, remembering their loved one. Maybe it's near their birthday, maybe it's near some special occasion. And that seems to me to be totally, that's normal. That's because we love them, okay? But when I go to places and I knock on the door and I say, hey, I'm here to visit, and they knew I was coming, and they just kind of barely open the door and say, I'm not seeing people these days, then prolonged periods of that, you really need some help. And the funny thing is, you're probably at a place where you would not receive that help. It's going to take a third party in your family to say, hey, Mom, would you consider going to see somebody? So, all right. What are some practices that help us grieve in a healthy way? We've been talking about unhealthy things that people reach for. What are some healthy ways that we can grieve?
Yeah, so I think, thinking about how isolation is unhealthy, really the opposite of that. So allowing ourselves to think and not internalize, not keep it to ourselves, our thoughts about whatever the grief is about. So this loss, sharing it with others, finding community. Yeah. And so, there can be ways of trying to do that in a formal way with grief groups. So locally, that might be through a hospice organization, through Grief Share. There are some resources. And then for younger folks, there are some children's books that can introduce the grieving and how we're still connected despite loss. And so there are different ways to sort of introduce that topic, because especially for kids, often but not always, if loss is happening for one person in the family, it's happening for multiple. So it can be difficult to talk about in many ways. So sometimes it's helpful to have something to sort of have a framework to talk through loss.
That's true. Excuse me. Sorry. Well, when I see this, like let's say that you've got to move, and your family, you're moving and you're moving a 15-year-old. Well, she's grieving losing her friends, but she'd like to talk to her parents about it, but her parents are the reason why she's leaving. So that becomes really, a hard conversation, doesn't it? But what I'm hearing you saying is that a lot of this is really simple. It is talking to people, talking to friends, sometimes going to a counselor, but it's not keeping it inside. That's the worst thing to do, right?
Exactly.
All right. So when at the end of this video, there'll be some resources listed. The hospice grief group will be listed, along with some recommended children's books. All right. So any final words you'd like to say?
I think just as you mentioned, John, not keeping things to ourselves, not internalizing, keeping things inside, just really trying to avoid that, which sometimes is what we do when we're hurting.
Right.
It's our inclination.
Well, it's our inclination for a couple reasons. One, there's these people who say, well, everybody's got stuff in their life, so why would I share my stuff because I know what their stuff is? And so we say, well, we're not going to burden them with that, so we keep it to ourselves. Well, I understand that. That's very sympathetic thinking, but it's also very unhealthy thinking. Because if they're your friend, they'd want you to share it. And another reason why we don't share it, I think sometimes is, we've put off a certain image most of our life. Men are like this a lot. And so now we've lost a spouse or we've had a divorce. And if we start talking about it, then we have revealed we have emotions and we have some soft side to us. And we have spent a lot of time trying to convince people we don't. And so it does attack our fragile egos, which is another conversation for another day. Well, thank you, Dr. Brittany. Appreciate it. And we hope this helps. And look at the resources at the conclusion of the video. Okay? Have a good day. Bye.